Hey everyone, it's Miss Tata, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make our ceramic plate using a plate mold. So let's talk about the materials you're going to need for this assignment. First thing you're going to need is some clay. You're going to need a plate mold. You want it to make sure it's nice and sturdy because the weight of the clay and the water in the clay can kind of tend to bring these down if they're not nice and sturdy and coated. So you want to have a nice sturdy plate. You could use a plastic plate or a paper plate. We're just using a paper plate. You want to have gauge sticks that are the same thickness. This is going to help us control the thickness of our plate. You want to have some kind of sharp tool, a rolling pin, and then lastly, some water. So once we have all those materials, we're going to be ready to get started. The first thing you're going to want to do when you get your clay is wedge the clay. Now, wedging clay is kind of similar to kneading dough in the way that we do it, but the goal of wedging is that we get all of the air bubbles and different kinds of textures of clay to be one consistent shape. So when I'm wedging, I typically move my little placemat aside and I work directly on the table. I'm using the bottom of the palms of my hands and I'm kind of pushing in one direction. I'm always standing when I work with clay. Again, you could be seated, but I tend to stand when I'm working with clay. It's gonna kind of start to create almost like a spiral, like one of those shells you would listen to at the beach. So I'm gonna keep on wedging this. Now, because the clay we're working with is pretty fresh out of the bag, you're not gonna need to do too much wedging, but as we move throughout the semester and begin doing different projects and recycling our clay, wedging is gonna be even more important to make sure that we have one consistent piece of clay. So once this is all wedged, we're gonna move back to our placemat here and we're gonna start rolling. As I said, for our plate, we wanna make sure that we have the same thickness for our gauge sticks, and we wanna make sure that these are underneath our rolling pin at all times. If we're rolling and these are all the way out here, that's not gonna control the thickness of our clay. So we wanna make sure these are both there. We have super big rolling pins, so you're gonna need to make sure you give yourself enough space to work. Don't wanna knock anything over, and we're gonna start rolling here. Now, our goal in rolling out our clay is that it's going to be big enough and round enough for this plate to fit. So that means we might need to move this around a bit so that we're not just rolling it straight up and down and making like a long piece of clay. We want to make it round, and that means we're going to have to roll out in every direction. Once your slab is all rolled out, it's an even consistency, there's no air bubbles, you're ready to take your plate, turn it upside down on top of your clay slab, and cut it out. Now, what I tend to do to be sure that I make sure that my cut is nice and where I want it to be is I draw and trace first, and then I go in and cut. So that way, if I make a mistake, it's not cut yet, it's just traced. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm gonna take my sharp tool, and I'm just gonna lightly trace around my clay, all the way around. There we go. So now we'll lift it up and we can see where our line is, but it's not yet carved in. So that way, if I accidentally made a mistake and went up or went in, it's not completely cut yet, it's just drawn. So now we can go in and make our cut. I'm gonna be very careful as you're going around. You can kind of periodically take away your clay. Okay. So now we have our nice perfect circle and we're ready to drop this into our plate mold. What we're gonna do first is take all of our extra clay and kind of ball it up, put it to the side. We can then use this to add details onto our plate, or we can just return it to our bag to use for something else. So what we're gonna do now is grab our plate mold, grab this off of here, and drop this into our plate mold here. So you want to try to line it up as best as you can with your plate, and then we're just going to lightly drop it onto the table. I'm just kind of lifting it and dropping it, and you'll see that the slab is kind of resting and falling into that mold. So just kind of dropping it a couple times. Now the edges are really rough, and I want to show you how we can get a nice smooth edge on our plate, because what we don't want to do, especially something that's like a cooking-ware item that you might use to eat or to even just to display, these rough edges, when they go in the kiln, are going to get really hard and sharp. So we want to make sure we smooth all that out. So let's see how we can do that. So this is where having water is going to be helpful. For this project, we're gonna just have our water in a little container here, so that way each person can have their own container. I'm going to just get my finger a little damp and go around and just start by smoothing the edges with my finger and rounding it out. This is the first thing I'm gonna do. If you notice any areas are really uneven, then you could go in with your knife tool or a carving tool and you can carve in and even it out even more. We want to make sure we have a really nice clean edge here before we move on. You can even go onto the plate and smooth it out. If you have any texture that you don't want on here from the canvas or anything else that you want to just kind of smooth out, you can do that as well. Okay, so once your plate is all nice and smooth, the next thing we're going to do is start thinking about our design that we're going to add onto our plate. Now, in your art book, you should hopefully already have some ideas, at least 4, and have one final design that you would like to do on your plate. I am going to be trying to make a pumpkin plate. So I'm going to be adding some things, I'm going to be carving some things, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. So the first thing I want to do is add on my little stem here. And what we're going to do is go back to that extra clay that we had put to the side, and we're going to use this for our add-ons. Now, if you really need some extra clay, of course I can get that for you. But again, try to use the clay that we have in our kit. So what I'm going to do, if I need to, I'm going to re-wedge this together, because again, we want to make sure that it's all consistent and there are no air bubbles. So I'm just trying to get this all wedged, and then I'm gonna grab a piece to start making my stem here. Now, I have never made a pumpkin plate, so I'm gonna just kind of see how this goes here. I'm gonna start trying to form my stem. It's gonna be helpful for you to have your design near you while you're working, so you can look at it and reference it as you are sculpting your objects. Now, with clay, it's very important that it does not surpass a certain thickness unless you're going to be hollowing out the inside. If your clay is any bigger than about an inch, maybe an inch and a half, or like an inch and a fourth, it is going to be too thick for the kiln. Water will get trapped in there, and most likely it will end up exploding in the kiln. I would say that's the biggest reason we have explosions, is because clay is just too thick. So you want to make sure any clay you're adding, again, is a good thickness for your plate. You also want to be mindful of this being weighed down too much. So you don't want to do so much weight in one area that your plate starts sagging. So I think I like this shape, and I think I'm going to bring it down so that there's a lot of area touching. Another thing to keep in mind when you're attaching clay, you want to have more surface area touching. If I was to just stick this here on the edge, oops, with just these 2 areas touching, the chances of this falling are really, really high. Now, if I were to bring it up and put it down here, and now this entire surface area is touching with this one, that's going to be a lot sturdier than just having the edges kind of secured here. Alrighty, so be sure to have a good amount of surface area on there. So I think that I'm happy with this for now. I can always go back and change it. So let's talk about how we're gonna add this to our plate. What you're gonna need is some kind of carving tool. You could use your knife tool, you could use just a regular plastic tool, and we're gonna make some score marks. So the way that you attach 2 pieces of clay is with scoring and slip or water. In our case, we're gonna be using water. So I wanna kind of figure out where am I gonna need to make these score marks. So I'm gonna put this on here and just give myself an idea of where I need to score, because I don't want to end up scoring in areas that are then going to be shown on my plate. I'm going to have to go back and smooth it. So we're going to score. Whenever I'm talking about scoring, I kind of explain it like Velcro. So think about 2 pieces of Velcro, how they have the different areas that kind of hook together. So when you're carving into your clay, you want to make sure that it's kind of rough and you're bringing up the clay. If you're just lightly making marks, that's not really gonna stick to the other piece of clay. So you wanna really make sure you're bringing up the clay, you're roughing up the clay, and then they will be easier to attach. It's nice and scored. We're gonna add our water. We don't wanna smooth this out, because again, we still wanna have those pieces of clay kind of sticking up, and we're gonna smooth this on here. Now, the next thing that is really important to do when you're attaching 2 pieces of clay is creating attachment coils. And I want to explain what they are here in a minute. I'm just going to thin this out a little bit. Woo. All right, so an attachment coil is a tiny coil that we're going to use and put in the kind of the seam between our 2 pieces of clay. So go back and grab some clay, of your extra clay, roll it in your hands, and we're gonna make some really thin coils. You could also roll it on the table. I just want you to be able to see it, so I'm gonna keep it in frame and do it on my hand. So once you have a really nice thin coil, you're going to wrap it around the seam of whatever you just added on. Now for this part, you're gonna need to use a plastic tool. This is gonna be too rough, so you're gonna need to use a plastic tool, preferably one with like a flat side and a dull side, so you don't wanna have any markings on here. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna push this into the seam, and we're gonna bring it down, and we're gonna bring it up into the object. So down into the base of the plate and up into the object. Attachment coil is that you can't even see that it's there. You want to smooth it out completely so that we don't even know we had an attachment coil. Nice and attached. I want to go in and add some texture. So now here's where we be doing the carving. We've added on some clay, and I'm going to show you how to carve with clay. Now you can use pretty much any tool you would like to do your carving. I recommend using a plastic tool rather than a metal tool, because this will most likely puncture way deeper than you want it to. And again, we just want to make some subtle carving marks on our clay here. So I'm just gonna make some texture that you might find on the stem of a pumpkin. I'm gonna go on the sides as well. All right, so I think that my pumpkin needs a little bit more to it. So I'm gonna be doing some carving around the pumpkin to kind of emphasize its shape. And then I might even add some extra clay to raise some areas of my pumpkin. I don't know if I like that line. Okay, it's starting to look like a basketball. So I'm gonna go in and erase this line I made. And I'm gonna erase this line I made. This is why it's important to make sure that you're not carving too deep, so that you can always go back and erase any lines that you might not like very much. So let's start over here in the center. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with my design. I have elements that I've added on, I have elements that I've carved into, and now I'm excited to see what this looks like once it's dried through the kiln, and then I'm able to glaze it a really nice orange, maybe mix some yellows and things like that. So this is my final design. I hope that this video is helpful to you so that you know how to create your plate, but also how to add things on.